All right, so I am Anthony Navarro, and as he said, we're going to have a talk about Mars, which sounds a little weird for where we are, but it'll make sense in a little bit. So about me a little bit, I am actually an aspiring astronaut. So I have a really diverse background where I skydive, I'm a pilot, I do scuba diving, I'm an emergency medical technician, military veteran, and I work on self-driving cars, as my day job, which is a lot of fun. So has anybody been to Mars? Didn't think so. Yeah? I want to go. One of these days, hopefully. But because I haven't been able to go to Mars, I did go to ReMars, which was actually right here in this building, and kind of gave me the opportunity to start with DeepRacer. One of the things I did at ReMars was find my way to the showroom floor, do one of the sessions just to learn about DeepRacer, and come down here with my little rinky-dink model, which had a really bad time on the computer. And I was kind of probably like a lot of you, if you haven't started doing DeepRacer yet, I didn't really know if I would be competitive. I didn't know if it was worth my time. Why spend the time doing it? And I decided to give it a shot anyways. So I'll get into kind of how that all went in a minute, but this is going to probably be a little bit more of a conversation than maybe some of the talks have been. So I kind of want to know if any of you have done DeepRacer, what has been your race strategy? There's a lot of things out there where people are trying to stay in the middle, follow the center line, stay on one side of the track, follow waypoints. Does anybody want to talk a little bit about maybe their approach? Center line? Yeah? What was that? Progress? Okay, nice. Have you tried it out? Not yet? All right. Anybody else? So there's a lot of, the waypoints, progress, center lines, that's a lot of what I've seen as well. I kind of took a little bit of a different approach, and because I've done a little bit of racing in the past, when you're a race car driver, what do you try to do? You try to straighten out the track, basically. And so you can kind of see here, that would be a race line that an actual race car driver would drive. So my approach was to try to teach my DeepRacer how to follow a race line and how to learn a race line. Which sounds really, really crazy, and I won't go completely into my, algorithms and everything, but it's really not, my algorithm is actually very, very simple to do this. And it makes sense. If you can teach the DeepRacer not to just stay in the straight lines because you're going around these S-turns, if you can just teach it to go on a straight line through all these S-turns and stay on the route, you're going to get faster times. So that was my approach. A little bit different, I think, than what some other people were doing. The other area that I played with was obviously the hyperparameters. These are definitely a bunch of dials to tune that make, a little bit of sense, but have really weird outcomes. Has anybody started trying these back to back where you just change one and you see a major difference? Yeah, and it doesn't always make sense, does it? So you got to kind of play with those a little bit. That's one of the areas where I'm still kind of learning, playing around with. I've done some where I just changed the batch size, or I've done the epoch size, or the learning rate, and they really drastically affect a model that won't converge now, or the performance is just way off. And so, and everything else, kind of being the same, that makes quite a bit of a difference. So this is one area where it's, to me, what I did is I just, not only going to the session, but then also just reading the descriptions of what each of these mean, and kind of, trying to apply some logic. I mean, I don't know if I was right or not, and I'm still playing around with them to try to figure out the best, and I think that's one area where reinforcement learning is nice, where you could launch multiple instances and have them kind of working in parallel to see what makes the most sense. So yeah, I showed up and started testing different models. And the first one that I did actually got me, you can kind of see it up here, in 12th place of the ReMars track, which was pretty awesome. For not even my first time, having just experienced it the day before in a session for a couple hours, that was the first time I had done it, and I hit 12th. Well, now I was motivated because the top 10 were getting robots, and, well, I want a robot. So I kept going, and I spent probably more time down on the floor than in talks after that. But then I got, over to 9 seconds, and you can kind of see now I'm in 6th place. And I kept going through, and I raced, and it was a pretty adrenaline-filled kind of race, actually. I was actually the last person allowed to race for the entire event, and I had just been knocked down to 4th out of 3rd place from the person in front of me. So I was going to get my jacket, get a trophy, get a little bit of, bragging rights, and now I just got knocked out of all of that. And so I had my one last shot to go. Well, luckily, I ended up winning. These are actually the world times, but I ended up second. I broke the world record at the time, which had also been broken at Remars. And then somebody from Japan beat my time, which that's great. That's pretty awesome. And I think they're on the floor right now competing and doing amazing stuff. But yeah, so it was great, and we had a little great camaraderie. Last minute kind of come through, win, and just changed up the whole leaderboard. So it was a lot of excitement, a really good time, and that's basically what my experience at Mars was like. Turned into something that that was the first year that we've had, or that Amazon had Remars. I decided to go because and if you're not familiar with Mars, it's like machine learning, automation, robotics, and space. Well, robotics and space are definitely right up my alley, so that's kind of where I went. It was a great event, and it brought me here. Winning that one got me a ticket to reInvent, to compete here. I didn't, make it to the finals yesterday. Finished it number 5, and I needed to be in the top 4, so just barely off. But the times that they're getting today and yesterday, I wouldn't have been competitive anyways. They're the people out there, those top 16 are doing some amazing things. So anyways, that's my experience. Any questions? Well, yeah, so the way that I approach my training regimen and how I train on these tracks is really not the overfitting method. I don't sit there training on one. The way that I look at the tracks is when you're first starting to learn, you don't want to go on a super hard track because it's really going to be hard to converge. But I look for tracks that have certain characteristics of the track that I want to compete on, certain turns, certain lengths, things like that. And I try to start on an easy track. And then I go to kind of a different track, and then another track. So I would train on maybe the reInvent track, and then I would train on the London or the Cumulo track. So, and then eventually, I would just try my models on one of the hardest tracks that I could find, even without training on it. And to me, if I can make it around some of the hard tracks without having to train on that track, ideally the model is going to do well. Hopefully, not well enough to win out there, but Yeah.
So I'm not sure if it's a dumb question or not, but how did you, so the type of changes you apply while you're racing, those incremental improvements that you did that eventually got you to win, are these different in style than the type of changes you would do when you train offline? So what type of changes you would make during the race, between iterations?
So you're asking kind of the changes that I would make offline during the race compared to what I'm doing online when I'm training models? I guess very different, because most of the time when I'm in line, I kind of have what I have. If it's trained, it's trained. If it's not trained, it's not trained, and I can't do anything with that. So my approach, one of the approaches that I did this year, I got on the floor and you can switch your model. So I would have 2 or 3 models ready to go. And what I asked them to do is have 2 cars ready with both my models on them. So instead of reloading a model, I would just switch cars. They were willing to do that, so that gave me an extra 10-15 seconds every time I would want to switch a model. So that, I think that was helpful. I played with the speed a little bit. Kind of finding that sweet spot I think is important, because you'll find it if you go too fast, you just blow through things. If you go too slow, you're just not going to win anything. Online, I guess I tried to multitask. So I tried to train 2 or 3 models in parallel because I didn't know. And even the model that won, I would still clone that and try. I trained it further, and it didn't perform very well. And so I ended up reverting to a model, an earlier version of it, and that worked better for me than one where I retrained that. So it's kind of interesting to see some of that stuff. But yesterday I was competing with my Remars model, and then I had taken that model and retrained it on the championship track. And that was what was getting me better times yesterday and better performance. My Remars track was turning off on one of the turns just constantly, kind of like everybody's was, but yeah.
Yeah, so what is the sweet spot for the hours of training that you do? And also one more question. So which hyperparameter did make sense for you in what terms, and can you guide maybe one or two that actually improved you? So you said earlier, right? You were getting 18 seconds or something, and then did you change hyperparameters, or if you did, which one actually helped you or something like that?
Yeah, I think I found a pretty sweet spot of hyperparameters right off the bat, because I hit 12th place, and so to me I was like, well, I'm not at the bottom, so I'm doing something right. So I kind of stuck with that. I think, let me think about it. I think it's my learning rate I decreased a bit, and then the entropy I think I increased a bit. And then the batch size, I have it pretty high. I don't have it maxed out, but it's pretty high. As far as training time, I had done stuff like, it needs time, and I get that. And so I had the luxury of kind of like training them the day before. And so I usually aim for like 7 hours. Yeah, because I'm just gonna set it there, and I leave it and forget it. So I just set for 7 hours. What's that? Wouldn't it go over? Oh.
Yeah, hello. Wouldn't that overfit the model because 7 hours is too much?
It could. That's why I don't keep training on the same track.
So you basically train for like 3 hours on one, then 3 hours for other. Is that how you do it?
No, I'll do like 7 hours on a track, and then
then 7 hours
7
per
hours on another track.
map.
But it also depends. Like you could overfit in an hour. You could overfit in 7 hours. It really depends on how many, like your action space, and also your batch size. A lot of those things go into
And the variations maybe.
yeah, and like the learning method. If you're using like mean square loss or whatever, or Huber, all of those things take more. Like depending on how you set it, can take more time.
Yep.
And if you don't give it enough time, it's not going to converge.
Yeah.
So my approach was, well, let me just give it a bunch of time. I've got time, which is why, like, the minimum I would say I probably train is probably 3 hours. But then I also just throw different tracks at it, because it's, again, I don't want to I want to generalize. I don't want to just overfit to a certain track. So that's kind of how I approach it.
So you did reclone to all the other different maps, right? So you train for 7 hours, then you reclone it to another map, That's how you do it.
Yeah, and I usually get to about maybe like 3 or 4 maps before I think it like looks well and it's doing what I want it to do. So, yeah. Cool. Questions? All right, thank you.